Thank you so much for being with us today. It's a very proud moment for me to be here celebrating the 30th anniversary of Gendering Macroeconomics special issue that Diane Elson, our friend late Nilüfer Çağatay, and Karen Grohn, who is also here with us today, have edited. And I'm hoping that this will mark a new milestone that we will be celebrating in the future of FMM and post-Keynesian macroeconomics, broadly speaking, and you are part of that history. So hopefully it will go down in our collective history in the years to come. Now, I thought of my title in length, and I thought, knowing all the background that has been happening around the efforts of gendering macro in the past 30 years, I should probably ask a devil's advocate question: why bother? Who cares? So this is the background of my title. A lot of what I will be saying is based on work that we have been doing at the University of Greenwich, in the picture here, with my dear colleague Cem Oyvat, who is also here, who will be presenting at 9 a.m. tomorrow. So please do join to hear more from him. And our work we have done, again, at Greenwich with Eurydice Fotopoulou. Now, on the night of the 23rd of October 2024, when we decided to devote this year's conference to gendering macro, I couldn't sleep very well. First, I counted all my feminist macroeconomics colleagues who should be invited here, and instead of counting sheep when I can't sleep. So it took a while. And then I wandered towards some unpleasant questions, inconvenient questions, I have to say, for our community. So why do we have so few macro-feminist research as opposed to micro-feminist economics, or broadly speaking, gender in labor economics, compared to feminist macro? Moving forward to more inconvenience, why some post-Keynesian economists, both men and women actually, think macro is about aggregate variables and the gender doesn't fit in well with that aggregate. At the same time, in our PK tradition, say I come from post-Kaleckian tradition, it's very normal, or the crux of our theory, that we need to look at class as an analytical variable. We do class disaggregation. We look at workers versus capitalists in our models. So why don't we do that for men and women? Or why do some post-Keynesians think it's not relevant? And of course, moving further to anger management issues, I couldn't avoid thinking, why do heterodox macroeconomists rarely cite us, feminist macro papers, even when our papers do include issues those other gender-blind macro post-Keynesian papers engage with? They write papers on balance of payments constraints. They wouldn't cite Stephanie Seguino because her paper has gender in the title. It's dropping out in some Google search, I suppose, of literature review. That's probably really bad literature review, but that's happening. We have wealth inequality in our papers. People who write on integrating wealth into PK models don't ever cite, well, because we also have gender in it. It should be better, isn't it? We do have wealth inequality and gender inequality, but no bother. Again, there are papers talking about integrating supply and demand-side interactions, endogenous technological change. Well, there are feminist versions of that too. No, they're not being cited. And Günseli Berik and her co-author have done that analysis a lot more eloquently than I'm granting about here. And of course, whenever we say gendering macroeconomics, ideas popping around are all about gender mainstreaming and gender budgeting. It is good, let's have this, but sorry, gendering macroeconomics is greater than, broader than gender budgeting. So we are certainly interested on the effects of fiscal policies on gender inequality, or equality for the better, but we're not only interested in that, we want to understand what are the effects of gender distribution and the care regime and the care deficit on the macroeconomy as well. And I'm not ashamed of trying to make a business case for gendering macro and gender equality from a purely macro perspective. Okay, moving forward, I'm going to try to take stock of the 30 years that happened since the first special issue of gendering macroeconomics in the area of feminist macro modeling. I'll ask the question, why should we do that? A little bit talk about how people, including us, have been doing that. And hopefully I'm going to end with a positive, where do we move forward from there? Some additional research questions for the students or lifelong researchers among us, and how do we then translate into a winning over policy. Okay, taking stock. A lot of this literature review is in the room, and you will be hearing from them live in the days to come. But moving from the gendering macro special issues that I have already mentioned, Diane has mentioned, in 1995 and 2000, a lot has happened. That's the good news. So we have a strand of now feminist structuralist macro, or if you like, feminist post-Kaleckian macro within the post-Keynesian tradition. These are demand-led growth models, have integrated also an endogenous supply side. Of course, Eliza's work with her colleagues, Irene van Staveren, Daniele Tavani, who is a usual regular in this conference, couldn't come this year. He has a good excuse, so he's not in my blacklist, but purple list, because I do resent a little bit people who were regulars who skipped this conference. Sorry, I do hold some mental lists of good and not so good stocks, but of course, Stephanie Seguino, who has been here with us before, her work has been very influential in shaping our work with Jem and Eurydice in terms of developing our feminist Kaleckian model. And moving forward now, what is for me very exciting is models that bring together that structuralist feminist analysis with learnings from ecological macro models, particularly that try to dig deeper into different types of public spending, integrating the care sectors, but also the green sectors and physical or rest of the infrastructure. Again, Karen Groen and her colleagues are doing really important work around that. I'm happy to maybe do a little bit of spill of some news to come, but Sergi Floro and Karen are working on a book to come. Hopefully, I put here a date. You don't have to live up to that date, Karen, but we are looking forward to that. Of course, Jim and I have been exactly trying to integrate that purple and green interactions. And again, an advertisement for 9 a.m. session tomorrow. Our PhD student, Yasmin Lucas, who is also here, will be speaking on the new work we're doing around synthesizing these green and care sectors analysis. There is a other strand within gendered macro modeling that looks at input-output analysis. In a way, Yasmin Lucas's work is now falling there as well. That goes back to the work that Rania Antonopoulos and colleagues have been doing at Levy Institute, İpek İlkaracan and colleagues. Again, Jerome Dehonau, Sue Himmelwhite, who are both here today, have been working on this input-output based analysis. İpek İlkaracan, Kijong Kim, Ajit Zacharias, Emel Memiş, and Thomas Mesterson, and I have to say who are all here, have brought that a further stage, integrating input-output macro analysis with micro household data analysis, and on top of that, time use integrated analysis. And they have coined the term, in addition to poverty or gendered analysis of poverty and employment, an analysis of time poverty. So I'm sure they will be talking more about that in their own presentations. I'm moving again further beyond the real economy limited macro modeling. Again, Ajit Zacharias, Gennaro Zeza, and Tom Masterson have now integrated in a stock flow consistent analysis, financial sector and balance of payments sector, which are very important questions in the global south, but also in the global north. Again, an advertisement for a session on Saturday. Grazzini, Cara Grazzini and her colleagues have a similar balance of payments integrated gendered macro analysis. So I hope you go there and hear Cara talking more about that. In a separate strand, feminist economists have done also very well in bringing some real-world realism into conventional CG, computable general equilibrium models. Here Fontana and her colleagues have done excellent work. The common future maybe of all this 30 years of feminist macro is integrating some important realistic structural features of the economy, including the gendered structure, and looking at public infrastructure going beyond the conventional physical infrastructure, integrating the care or the social infrastructure, looking at distribution, bringing it in, a gendered analysis of bargaining power, not just in the market economy, but also in the household. These are important extensions to the conventional structuralist futures that we know in the post-Keynesian or structuralist tradition that would look at oligopoly power, sectoral structure, or issues around import dependency. So having taken all that stock, I will try to summarize the why question, or the answer to the why question, around 5 key reasons. Well, the first has been elaborated very well by both Diane and Eliza. Labor doesn't grow on trees, it needs to be reproduced, and the care economy is a key sector of the economy, just as the traditional structuralists thought manufacturing is a key sector. And that should include an analysis of not just the paid care work, but also the unpaid domestic care work. The second reason is the social norms, and anyone who attended today to Marcella Corsi's excellent introductory lecture knows that social norms are sticky. They do determine gender division of labor. They do determine behavioral differences between men and women, men workers versus women workers would have different behaviors, and it's not just about inequality, they will have repercussions about macro outcomes. The third reason is the effects of all that on things we care, like the well-being, or a business case for care economy, the effects of that on productivity, on the labor supply, again on the supply side of our models, or on the demographic change, population growth, or fertility, all important supply side variables. You're not going to adequately understand the supply side if you don't gender your macro model, and you will not be able to talk about demand and supply interactions if you don't have gender as an analytical category. You will not have a good analysis of fiscal policy effects or even industrial policy effects. Breaking news for you, multipliers are gendered. There's not one single multiplier. And I should maybe add, one of the regulars of this conference once had told me, we have big challenges of productivity. We are not going to talk about the care economy here. China is beating us in the productivity race. I was speechless, honestly. Yes, it is true. Europe has a productivity issue. Well, if you want to deal with that, industrial policy has to talk about things that may sound mundane as childcare, early childhood education, nursery teachers, their pay, their working conditions. So you have to gender your industrial policy design. Distribution is a very key concept for PK, post-Keynesian macro. Well, distribution needs to be gendered because jobs are gendered and there is racial profiling of jobs. So intersecting inequalities is a key component of an adequate analysis of distribution of income and wealth. Last but not least, we have been talking in this conference a lot about intersecting, interrelated, multiple crises. This has a climate action need. It also has a care need. So we need to, if we will have proper ecological macroeconomics, which we proudly have in every parallel session, at least in one session in this conference at FMM conferences, well, we need to gender ecological macroeconomics too. So that's my green, purple, red alliance of an eco-feminist, post-Keynesian synthesis of macro. If you don't do that, if you omit gender and the care economy at your own peril, it will be an omitted variable bias, as we know in econometrics. An omitted variable bias is poor econometrics, and it will also lead to poor policy analysis, I'm sorry to break. So, going then to my 5 points, we should start by having a care regime as part of our growth regime analysis if we want to properly gender macroeconomics. So we should ask questions like, what's an optimum care regime? That should include things around childcare as well as education. It should talk about health, of course, but it should also talk about long-term care of the elderly or the disabled. We should talk about who cares, what is the paid or unpaid element of care work, and how is that gendered in terms of its distribution? Who is paying for care? Is it public provision or private provision? If the latter, is it formal or informal? If it is public provision, is it taking the form of universal public provision of care services, or are they giving baby bonuses such that women continue to do that as part of their gender division of labor in the domestic sphere? What are the conditions of the care workers, the carers, and what are the conditions of the one who is being cared? That goes back to the quality discussions that Elisa was making. What is the labor market structure in terms of paid working hours? How does that affect provision of care and the distribution of that? What is the situation about the location of where we work for pay? Are we working from home? Are we working close to home? All these parameters that will define a care regime will have crucial implications on productivity, on fertility, in terms of long-term demographic implications. It will have also political implications. I'm not going to dwell long on that because İpek İlkaracan in the final plenary will talk about her joint work with EASE, where they do find that if you rely on things like baby bonuses, pronatalism, women doing most of the care, you end up with authoritarian regimes. So if anyone is not convinced with that, I would refer everyone to also read Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, or you can watch the show with 6 seasons, which I recently completed. She calls it, it's not science fiction, it's actually non-fiction. It has happened, sadly, and it is happening again. So, the second point, we need to gender macro-behavioral analysis because the existing gendered social norms means we have different marginal propensities to consume. What we found with Gemma and Eurydice is that women's marginal propensity to consume in the care economy is larger than that of men, but then men tend to consume more in the rest of the goods and services compared to women. Stephanie Seguino and Sergi Floro were saying this is because women face more uncertainty. They tend to save more. But when it comes to things that improves households' nutrition outcomes, healthcare outcomes, education outcomes, women actually, the shop is yours. They open their purses. Now that means if you put more income in the hands of women, it leads to more spending in goods and services that improve the health and education outcomes. Well, that directly translates into labor productivity outcomes. This means if you spend in sectors which would predominantly hire women as the government, say in the care economy, you would end up, given the occupational segregation, hiring more women. Well, that would not only have gendered effects on employment, but it would also have different consumption effects, different productivity effects. Hence, supply side as well as the multiplier is gendered. So on that third level of gendering the supply side multiplier, we have to talk about, of course, gendering infrastructure. And here I was planning to rant a little bit about the orthodox Marxist analysis that in the 21st century today is still thinking not-for-profit public paid care workers are unproductive because of some 19th century fundamentalist understanding, religious reading of Karl Marx. I'm sorry to say, but feminist economists who do come from, at times, from Marxist backgrounds, don't deny that background, some of whom are in this room today, Diane, Sue Himmelwhite, UK Women's Budget Group, have moved on with that. We do acknowledge care work is productive work, therefore we advocate for calling public social sector as a care sector as an infrastructure sector and a productive sector because it has both direct and indirect impact on productivity. It leads to healthier and more educated and more socially talented, I have to say, workforce. It does relieve women from providing care if it is underprovided socially, and their increased labor force participation may contribute to aggregate productivity in the economy. Otherwise, the care work will be being done invisibly, unpaid in the domestic sphere. İpek İlkaracan has therefore called that sector purple sector, and I'm wearing purple in that direction today. So what we need to understand is all these infrastructure extension or incorporating social infrastructure into our understanding of infrastructure. Of course, that would also apply to the caring of the elderly or the frail. They're not going to come back to the labor market, but it does contribute to our social fabric. It does make us more innovative, more secure, and thereby more productive. So what we did to address these in a macro model, and it is a very aggregate macro model, it's gendered, but there is a lot to extend in that model. Again, a call to the PhD students in the room to do that. Cem Oyvat, Yurdisi Fotopoulou, and myself, we have said productivity is endogenous in the rest of the economy, in the non-care sectors. It's changing as a function of the wage rate, the aggregate output, but also public spending in both the social infrastructure and the physical infrastructure. Of course, it changes with private investment. It does change with also what the households do in terms of how they spend, in terms of the care spending, but also what they do with their unpaid care work. That would have dynamic implications for unit labor costs that in turn will feed into private investment because private investment is about, well, unit labor costs. If you're more productive, your unit labor costs will be lower. It does affect net exports, and it does affect your balance of payment constraint. It relaxes your balance of payment constraint if you invest today in the care economy. Of course, on the supply side, it's a very important determinant of labor force participation of women, but also men. And of course, it's important for population growth. It is growing on social infrastructure. When women don't want to become unpaid care workers, they stop caring and they choose not to have children. So it does have actually long-term implications on population as well. Here, of course, it's not just the supply or the quantity of labor, but it's also the quality of labor that is affected by the provision of care. And of course, if we are interested in what's going to ultimately happen to employment in our macro analysis, we need to know what's happening to both the demand side and the supply side when you pull these levers. And last but not least, the provision of public social care infrastructure, or for the worse, the lack of that, will have important effects on how gendered the sectoral distribution of employment is. We have an occupational segregation in our models in different sectors. Of course, care economy is very women-dominated, but we say in extensions of that model, this is endogenous. If we hire women in the care economy, pay them decent wages, offer them decent career prospects, I'm sure men would want to queue to get education and training to apply to care jobs as well. So all these things can change. Social norms are endogenous. I had these nice graphs, but I'm going to just jump to that. So what you do in terms of public spending in the care economy has short-term effects on demand and employment. It does have effects on wages and bargaining and distribution. And in the long run, it does have important effects on labor productivity. In the same way, if you provide jobs that would hire women or offer opportunities to women, say in the export zones, but you undersupply paid, high-quality social infrastructure, care infrastructure, well, who's going to care for the people? You would be squeezing unpaid care by making women work for pay, but that squeezing unpaid care will come and bite you in the labor productivity in the long run in terms of less productive children who haven't been adequately cared for. So if you're trying to draw women to the labor market in export zones, you have to complement that by the provision of childcare services adequately with a high quality. So that would give me our analysis of the multiplier. Good news, multipliers are large. Well, we know that, Keynesians know that. Now we need to get to gendering them as well. So we do find in our work with GEM, both for emerging economies as well as for a high-income economy, Britain, very strong effects of public spending in the care economy, in social infrastructure, as well as the green economy, on both the demand and supply side. Very strong effects on GDP and employment. So, for example, just to give you a number, you get in the UK, from the care economy, a multiplier of 3.6. If you contrast that with public gross fixed capital multiplier, it's lower, 2.4, still quite high, but lower. The care multiplier is higher because it's affecting not just the level of demand, of consumption and investment, but it's also affecting, in a positive way, the composition of how we consume. Something I said earlier about the marginal propensity differences. On the supply side, again, quite remarkable effects. That should be important for productivity and investment and net exports, which we do find they are. If you increase in Britain public spending in the care economy by 1 percentage point of GDP, you end up creating 4.6% more productive rest of the economy outside the care sectors. That effect is surprisingly smaller for physical gross fixed capital formation. Of course, the time effects of these effects are very different, and again, a research question for the students in the room to explore further. What components of spending in childcare versus other components of care, in which dimension affects the supply side? I think very interesting questions. But despite these strong productivity effects of care infrastructure investment, we have some fascinating employment effects overall. Again, for Britain, with care spending, we would be able to increase employment by 1.5% in total. The share of women in that total employment increases if you spend in the care economy. So, fiscal policy is one of the biggest equalizers, the most effective way of creating employment. And we come from a tradition that talks a lot about what is the effect of distribution on output and employment. We did that for understanding the effect of gender distribution. I'm going to say we have coined the term, we acknowledge the dual role of wages in general and dual role of wages of women as well. So it's not just a demand stimulator, but it's also a cost. So we say the economy could be gender equality-led or gender inequality-led. It's a general model in the good spirit of Keynes's theory. We should say empirically for the UK, we did find the UK is both class-wise wage-led and gender-wise, gender equality-led. We coined the term equality-led. All good news, but the bad news is with changing distribution, you get only a small little bit of demand stimulus. You get, however, positive news, great productivity stimulus. Bring it together, what will happen to employment? It's not going to increase. So if you want full employment, genuinely, a very Keynesian goal of macro policy, you need to bring in fiscal policy and put your money where your mouth is, particularly because productivity effects are very strong in the medium run, and the demand effects of tweaking, leaving things just to distribution and private sector or minimum wage tweaks will not deliver the demand that you need for full employment. So, gendered multiplier. I have already said a few things, but what is the good thing about gendering the multiplier? It shows you that public spending is partly self-financing. So if you increase public spending, your primary budget balance as a ratio to GDP will not increase one-to-one. It will increase because it's not magic. It's only partially self-funding, but it will increase less than one. And that's a reference to a great compendium that Karen Groen has been editing at Brookings Institute. So the table was made by her push, so credit to her. The effects on the UK are very strong. So actually care public spending is more than self-financing because we have so high multipliers. The physical infrastructure spending in the UK, it's also self-funding, but it would still lead to some increase in public debt to GDP. So you're gonna need to tax and do something else if you're concerned about it. With emerging economies, the table refers to that 8 other countries we worked on with Jim. The self-financing is less, fiscal space is narrower, it's still there, and if you can see the numbers for South Korea, again, care economy is more self-funding, and it's closer to Britain. But the good news is, in all of these economies, it's still at least partially self-funding, meaning public budget deficit to GDP ratio is not going up one-to-one when you increase spending. Right, so we need to, fourth point, adequately gender the distribution part of our analysis. What we did, again, in our model with GEM is to think of wage bargaining as a function of employment right of men and women and with spillovers from each other's wages. They have different bargaining powers, and thereby you need to think about that wage bargaining as a separate gendered relationship. There's, of course, racial profiling of jobs. Those analyses need to be furthered with that intersectionality. A lot of people often tell me there is no gender pay gap crisis, glass ceilings are partly broken. Well, yes, but the sticky floor is persisting, and it's actually much more important that occupational segregation at the bottom of the distribution, particularly in the care economy, jobs done by women, by migrants, by racial minorities, is very important if you want to understand an adequate analysis of class distribution from a gender lens. Of course, all these things are endogenous. They can be changed. They can be changed by policies, taxation, or public spending. And it's therefore important to understand how they would influence demand and supply side analysis. In another analysis, thanks to a comment from Diane with my colleague Alex Kushansky, who will be also here tomorrow speaking, we find that actually wage share is likely to be lower in sectors where we have a higher share of women. That means trade unions also should get their act together and probably think how they can give a muscle bargaining power to women. Last point, why do we need to gender macro models? Well, if we want to really understand and provide solutions to the intersecting and interacting crises in care and climate, we need to properly have a purple-green macro gendering ecological macro effort to arrive at what I call an eco-feminist post-Keynesian macro model. This is in a way trying to move from what Rebecca Diskey calls a careless economy towards a green and caring economy. That would require, as I said before, for the public sector to put their money where their mouth is. Then that would require moving beyond competing, investing in care versus investing in the green economy. We need to do both, so we need a new paradigm in fiscal policy, which we call a needs-based fiscal policy. Of course, purple and green are complementary in their own ways. Again, IPEC will talk more about that in the closing session. But if you're worried about technological change and artificial intelligence taking jobs, we are, again, there to understand these complementarities and what the purple and green sectors are there to offer to us. I will skip the number crunching that we have done, promising a positive alternative to decarbonization and redeployment away from fossils towards those green and care economy and other infrastructure jobs via a public sector investment mobilization. The good news is there are a lot of new jobs we can create. And I always get asked, well, how do we fund that? Good news, as I said, there is money, multipliers are high, and they are gendered. But we need to talk about progressive taxation of both income and wealth. Again, a topic for the closing plenary for Karen. We need to talk about how do we extend our space for borrowing. Women's Budget Group has been for long advocating how we redefine infrastructure, extending it to public social care infrastructure such that we can rely on some form of fiscal credibility while still borrow if need be. And of course, there's a lot to gender in our discussions of national investment banks, how those development banks can be mobilized to serve for also creating investment in the care economy. And last but not least, we have to open the Pandora's box and talk about gendering monetary policy with targets of full employment and inflation in a dual fashion while delivering those needs-based priorities. And I'm very happy to hear that there are quite a few papers gendering monetary policy in this session. We have been, I think, better in gendering fiscal policy in the 30 years, less so in the monetary policy, and there are great papers at this conference. So please do submit your articles to the European Journal of Economics and Economic Policies, such that in 30 years we can celebrate that special issue. Thank you so much, and there are some difference.